Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session. It is my pleasure to moderate and introduce this session today, which will cover the building blocks of open science. My name is Erica Pastrana. I am editorial director of Nature Research Journals. I work for Springer Nature, and I also am planning and developing the Springer Nature Open Science roadmap. So it is my pleasure today to introduce you this session. Open science, as we know, is essential to move research forward. It is a key part of reproducibility, transparency, and advance in discovery. So what we are going to be discussing today with three panelists that I'll introduce you in a minute is how we can collaborate across the industry to advance open science. What does it mean? For all of us, open science, and how we can build collaborations to help researchers achieve an open science future. So, to discuss this interesting topic, I have three panelists with me. Um, Colleen Campbell leads the strategic engagement in the open science transition at the Max Planck Digital Library. I have Simon Adar, who is the co-founder and CEO of CodeOcean, a computational research platform. Um, and I have Gareth Dyke, who is the content director at Research Square Company, which publishes or is the platform for preprint deposition as well as protocol preprinting, protocol exchange. So I'm going to jump straight into the discussion with these great panelists today by just offering one of the many definitions of open science that I've come across, and I'm sure many in the audience have come across, that I find helpful to start the discussion. So this comes from Open Europe Research and states that open science aims to open up access to all parts of the research process. For example, methods, results, publications, data, software, materials, tools, and peer reviews across academic subject areas to increase collaboration, disseminate knowledge, improve transparency and reproducibility of research, and support research integrity. So there's a lot there, obviously, but I think the take-home message is that open science aims to share in an open way all elements of science, not just the article, not just open access, which is one element of open science, which we'll discuss, but it talks about other elements that are essential, other building blocks that are essential to contribute to that open science future. So I'd like to start off the panel with a broad question about really what open science means to them, to all of you, and in particular, as the topic of the session is the building blocks, which building blocks do you think are a key priority for you in particular, and how do you see the transformation for that building block into open science? Colleen, would you like to get started?
Sure, thank you very much. What is open science to me? Now, I think it's important to also begin understanding the different perspectives that we represent. So, I'm going to speak from the position of a library, but even in the context of libraries, you have different kinds of librarians in different areas of work. So, in the context of open science, you might have, librarians who support researchers in the research process, but for this particular question, I'm going to actually take it from the perspective of a librarian with responsibility for collections, because I think that a good portion of the participants in the Charleston Conference find themselves in that role. And there I would like to say that open science is about it's about the way research is conducted. Um, and I'm going to tease out one piece of open science, and that is open access in terms of disseminating the results of research. And here we might talk specifically about the scholarly article. And in that respect, I would say that open access is something different. It's open access ultimately is a business model underlying the dissemination of scholarly journal articles. So we have two different things here. We have the article of in open access, and that's business model, and then open science being, the behavior of researchers in conducting their work and creating artifacts that are part of their research. And just one final note in that respect is in terms of building blocks. Um, I mean, we can get into this in a little bit more detail in a moment if we can, but I would just like to start off saying that I view open access as a gateway to foster then open science practices in research. So it's kind of almost a precondition actually to really fulfill the potentials of open science. I could continue, but maybe we want to share the floor a bit.
Thanks.
Yeah. So
We will definitely touch on those important points in a minute. Gareth?
Yeah, thanks for the chance to join this panel today. As you mentioned, I work for Research Square Company, which is a big preprint server, one of the largest in the world. So speaking from a researcher's perspective, open science and open access is all about accessibility, as the name suggests, and for researchers to be able to see what others are doing and share what they are doing with the world immediately without any restrictions, without any problems. And so that's what we aim for, and that's what I think, for me at least, like a big building block and also a big blockage in current open science is, like this equity and accessibility of data sharing and the sharing of things like preprints and protocols that I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit. But in terms of building blocks, I would say for me, from my personal perspective, the biggest building block that we need to put in place to help the open science movement and to help researchers with sharing is just education, and to help people understand how this can be beneficial for their careers and how they can do it effectively to benefit themselves and benefit other researchers. So yeah, it's a great question there.
Great. Thank you. Simon?
Yeah, for me, there are two parts of open science. One is the finding itself and the ability for the community to actually know about it and have access to it. And the other part is the actual work itself and our ability to leverage the work. So, you can sort of map those two into the publication or the preprint or, the words themselves that describe the finding. And then the other part is the actual scientific work. It could be from the materials themselves, it could be from the protocols, the methods, and the data, the results. If you have code, that's going to be part of it. So all the artifacts part and our ability to take the work and use it somewhere else or build upon it. So that's the other part. So to me, open science is the combination of the two, and the fact that everyone, not just scientists, but everyone can know about the finding and then leverage it.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, all three of you, for making great points that I think will open up a lot of discussion. So let me sum up a little bit what we've heard and set the stage for the next discussion point. So, as Colleen has said, the actual article, the actual publication remains a very important part of scientific discourse and scholarly communication. It's where a researcher presents their main results. It's almost quote unquote when the finished product of a given research project, and making sure that is accessible in a way is essential. It's almost like a prerequisite because that sets the stage of that work, that project. So that's a very important element that we can kind of start the discussion on, and then we'll move on to the very important pieces that both Gareth and Simon have mentioned, which is beyond the article itself, there are elements that really support those findings. There is the data that was generated and normally sort of supported, be it qualitative or quantitative. There is typically, if there is a lot of data, for example, code to analyze that data, there is methodology to that approach. So all these elements of science can also be shared. And if they are shared, then science advances much more quickly because any given reader or, the next researcher interested in that topic can readily use or deploy or check or verify the underlying elements of that research project. They don't just have to read the story, if you will, and then sort of move on from there. They can actually access those objects. So these are very important elements. Let's touch a little bit on the article, as Colleen was saying, sort of as the starting point for that. We've, gotten very far with policies around open access in the last few years, as we all know, starting perhaps with Plan S's mandates for open access to publications, and more recently the OSTP, the White House announcement on public access to research by federal agencies here in the U.S. So um, maybe we can start about there. So is that all that is needed, Colleen? Can you tell us a little bit more about your perspective about making sure the results and the findings are accessible? Are these policies enough to get us where we need to be with researchers? And if not, what are your priorities to get us to a fully accessible article?
So thank you. Um, I think that you can't have a discussion about open access and open science without also talking about the incentives for openness, and I think the current uh, um, roadblocks, right, that are or the elements that are not incentivizing openness currently, right? You mentioned funder mandates. Um, and even within the context of funder mandates for openness, I mean, I know that navigating the different mandates and understanding what a researcher can and cannot do, and can they use their funds to help publish openly or not, etc., that can be very confusing. In order for a mandate to be effective, we need to understand, how well is it monitored, compliance, how well is compliance monitored, what sort of uh, what happens if authors don't comply. I mean, this is a very complex thing. Um, but at the same time, I think it's really important to think about how all of the incentives of different stakeholders in research and scholarly communication interact. I think this is key. We all have to get on the same page, and when I think of stakeholders, um, I, before that, let me say that I think that scholarly communication is actually part of the research process itself, and therefore, um, when we think about open access and moving toward open science practices, we have to consider the funder, the author, the library, the institution of the author. All of these parties need to come together and align their around their objectives and the incentives that they are giving for authors. Because this I think is ultimately the key, is we all participate in producing research, in funding research and producing research. And if we don't have our incentives aligned and our policies aligned, or at least our objectives, then it will be difficult to move forward. I think we can see the new guidance issued by the OSTP is something that certainly will incentivize publishers to to more to embrace open access in for their journals, I believe, and so I think it's extremely important that, yeah, the research community, those who fund and produce research, also begin to align their policies.
Gareth, Simon, if you want to jump into the question before we move on to the artifacts a little bit more.
I wanted to just say a few things about incentives, if I may. I mean, these vary, of course, between different countries, even between different institutions within different countries. And for me, like one of the big kind of, not an issue, but one of the big problems that, I mean, governments can mandate these things, like the European Union can tell all of its researchers, you should be publishing your work in open access journals. But if my institution is not recognizing that kind of journal, maybe because of the impact factor or because of the the funding that I might have to convert my higher impact factor journal into a more open access publication, then that's a huge issue for researchers. I think that you can want to publish open access, and in my experience, most researchers, if they understand what it means, do want to publish in open access journals, but that's often not what they get rewarded for or get incentivized for by their institutions. So if that system, and this is a perennial kind of problem, of course, but if this could be aligned, if I could publish in open access journals and that was something that would still get me my grade 5 ranking in the UK university system, and I get returned for the research assessment exercise, that would be fantastic. But at the moment, there's a disconnect between funders and incentives for researchers.
Yeah, from my on my side, I think there are the two parts with incentives. One is something that's going to be more mandatory side, and the other one is more behavioral side. Like, what's the standard that other scientists are implementing and wanting to be part of that community. So, and I do believe that we need both parts. Um, and because we say that when funders are mandating, then both publishers and the research community are moving forward towards open science much faster. But we did see uh, the movement of open science started even before that. So it takes a village to basically move forward. So if funders, universities, publishers, scientists, everyone will take just one step forward, I think the whole community will be moving towards this ideal that we're talking about, which is open science. So it's really an effort that everybody needs to take, and it doesn't have to be like a step function with now everything is open science and now we're everybody is implementing it. It's a wide spectrum, and everyone can take one step and then another step, and this way how we can make progress as years go by.
Indeed. So, so let's talk a little bit about those other artifacts because, like we were saying initially, open science doesn't stop with the article itself. It's supposed to be much bigger than that. It's supposed to be about the whole collection of resources and outputs that that research project has has produced. That's a very ambitious goal. If we're still talking about behavior change and incentives just for the article, as we were saying, and already facing roadblocks there, cultural and just, more institutional. Um, with open science, we're gonna definitely also see that it takes time and a big cultural change to support authors or researchers and communities in becoming, comfortable with sharing all these elements of research. So I'd like to focus a little bit on this. The recent OSTP mandate again, and obviously some of the European Union institutions as well have for some time already been talking about data. So data being one element where it's already, being included in these policies and mandates as a key element that needs to be shared at the time of publication. Um, and in my reading of the OSTP announcement, the concept of data was actually quite broad. It talked about objects or elements that were necessary to reproduce that article, that publication. So under that umbrella, obviously one could include more things than just the pure, data set, for example. It could include indeed code if that was a central part of the work. It could include a key protocol because obviously you need to know in the details of how the methodology was conducted. So, we're seeing some steps, again, from funders, pushing the boundary to make researchers think about sharing that, and in fact, already giving us some deadlines and very concrete expectations that we might be needing to do this very soon. Um, so, can we discuss a little bit the challenges to get us there then, in your views, or your priorities, however you want to frame it. But where are we going to focus our efforts to make that happen, to actually achieve a solution where authors don't feel overwhelmed to have to figure out all these things? As Colleen was saying, now they already have to think about where they need to publish to accommodate all these different requirements. And with data, same thing could happen where, it feels quite overwhelming for a researcher to understand how do I do this? How do I share my data as I'm required to? So how do we help? How the people in this panel think about supporting or advancing this goal? Simon, do you want to start?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So the way that I think about it is that there are two parts. There's the physical lab and there's the computational lab. The physical lab is where you are actually doing the experiments, and maybe the physical lab can go outside of the physical lab, out in the outside world. But then you need to store the data. And today, we used to sort of write the data on a piece of paper or things like that. But today everything is digitized. So there's the digital lab, and the digital lab stores the data, and then very often scientists are analyzing the data, and they can do it in, let's say, two ways. One is there's some different software that can, you point and click and then you generate results with sort of predefined analysis, and then that generates graphs for you, and then you can take those graphs and put it in a paper. But what we're seeing today is that the trend is more and more scientists are actually learning how to code their methods, and there are more and more packages in code that scientists can leverage to standardize their analysis. And the benefit there is that the reproducibility of the computational work is much more defined. So, you can have basically the essential triplet of any computational work: the code, the data, the computing environment that has all the packages, and then the computing infrastructure if you sort of tie that into it. And then that generates the result. So if you're able to capture that essential triplet, then there are two parts that are happening at the same time. One, and both are very important for scientists. The first one is trust, and the other one is speed. We can better trust the results that were presented. We can trust it ourselves. We can trust it with our colleagues. If I'm a PI, I can trust the analysis and results that were generated by master students, PhD students, postdocs, or anyone in the lab, because I know that I can recreate it. If somebody just, had a series of 50 clicks in a software and then that generated a result, there's no way that I can actually recreate those results. So the trend is very obvious, and we're seeing more and more scientists learning how to use coding scripts with Python or other programming languages as well, and then making sure that they themselves can recreate the work as well as their colleagues. So now you basically have this trend, but it creates sort of a difficulty because most scientists today, they're creating ad hoc workflows, and they're not really able to capture that. So that's something that we at CodeOcean, we're trying to help. And by the way, whether or not you want to do open science and publish that work, reproducibility, even if it's private for yourself or for your lab, is like the first step. Then, if you have everything reproducible, if you have all the essential triplet of the work, then you can make a decision whether you want to share it with the rest of the community, which I think is the right thing to do. But you'll be able to benefit from the concept of reproducibility if you're working in a more advanced way.
Indeed. I mean, some very good points. And I'd like to hear Gareth a little bit talk about sort of how you at Research Square see also, advancing open science. I mean, there's no, bigger evidence of the value of early sharing than what we've seen with the pandemic. And obviously, you also support sharing of protocols through a preprint server for protocols. So, I mean, I'm curious about how you think of the preprint living in this environment where, as Simon was saying, there's more transparency, there's better tools to support researchers, even within their own lab, following reproducible workflows and creating already systems that are ready to be opened up to the world as soon as that researcher is ready.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, trust and speed, as Simon said, like this is what researchers are looking for. But even though we've got like almost 4 million preprints on our platform, it's quite eye-opening to just mention that only about 12% of researchers are preprinting their research. And of that 12%, the majority are STEM discipline researchers. So we've got a long way to go with convincing researchers that this is a good idea. I mean, most people, when you talk to them about open science and open research and open access, they're all for it, but there are concerns. So speed is an easy one for us at Research Square to convince authors, you preprint with us, you get slotted into the Springer Nature in review system. You can do that by making a submission to one of the journals, not just Springer Nature. Lots of other publishers are in that ecosystem as well. Your research gets preprinted, and many researchers opt for that at the submission stage. Many don't opt for that at the submission stage. And then people can see your research. They can potentially see the peer review process as well as the preprint provides that open platform. People can comment. But we face like a big trust issue, and that, going back to what Simon was just saying, is where we have to do much more at Research Square and other kind of advocates of open science, open research, to help people understand not just why this is a good thing for their careers and for their publication success, but also like how that this is a process that can be trusted. And we do workshops all the time, and I can tell you that the number one concern that researchers have is, won't somebody else steal my project, my research results, my data, if I put my method, my data, my code, my protocol, my unpublished information up on your preprint server? And so that's, I think, one of the fundamental reasons why, on the one hand, people find it to be a good idea in principle, but in practice, they know what their universities want to see. They want high impact listed publications in big journals. They worry about what will happen if they participate in open research, in preprinting and so on. And so we have to reassure people, and we do spend a lot of time reassuring people that this is a good thing. I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure it does.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I'd love to hear Colleen. I'm sorry to put you a bit on the spot as at least the closest to a university among all of us. So I'm curious about how you think about those incentives coming from institutions and how, we can make sure that sort of message is sent across that it is valuable to be
Mhm.
sharing your research and that in fact we're shifting the balance from citations, journal impact factors, things like that, to,
Mhm.
following open science practices as being something that is rewarded, it is recognized, and it is valued by institutions.
Yeah, I mean, this is a it's a really tough one, I have to say. It takes a culture change, and I know that early career researchers, researchers especially, are under so much pressure to publish, 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 and I can fully sympathize with that pressure. At the same time, I look at I'm speaking from the perspective of a library, let's just say um, at a state institution in the US right now, the idea of open science might, for some, might even seem like the image that comes to mind is the NASA spacecraft that collided with the asteroid this week. That you make that impact, this decision for open science, and then boom, all of a sudden it explodes into a million different pieces, which actually is a great thing, right? We want, because every research or every project is unique, and but all of a sudden that becomes um, very difficult to manage, and I think that institutions um, there is, of course, the signal from OSTP around openness will certainly, that's a good step in this culture change, right? And I think that we will have impacts there from publishers, from libraries, from institutions, and authors, consequently. And then we will have to get ourselves organized. Any individual institution may not have the ability to support researchers in this storm of research and open science practices and artifacts that they need to share and curate, etc. Uh, and yeah, it will mean we will need more services. We will need to rethink our organizational structures within institutions, within libraries. Really turn things around. It's going to be huge, but I think at this point it's happening. We will we're on the right track. I was kind of wandering,
Yeah,
but
thank you for
I
that.
hope there's
So,
something there.
absolutely. So Gareth touched on something very important earlier that I want to go back to, which is, the issue of equity and the issue of, the different disciplines and where, we are, supporting, say, STEM versus, humanities and other researchers. So obviously, it's very important that these new policies, new practices, and standards coming from funders, institutions, you know, help us move the needle towards more equity and not the opposite, right? They don't achieve even more inequality or more hardship for certain communities to achieve these very lofty goals of open science. So it is very important in this day and age that as we are starting this journey, we already build it on the right foundations of equity and that we take into account the different needs of different communities that not, a platform, just making a platform available may not quite reach everybody the same way and may not sort of be sufficient for different disciplines. So over to you to discuss a little bit how we should be thinking about equity from the beginning and building this into the incentives, the tools and the platforms that we build to support open science, as Simon was saying, and the education, right, that we were also mentioning. Gareth, do you want to get started?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good point. Humanities and social science researchers face far fewer journals, much more difficult to find outlets for their publications. So you would have thought, or I would have thought, that this group of researchers would be very keen to preprint their research, but they aren't. And so, like, to get us started, like, I would say that this just comes back to what I've been, talking about before, that we need to put the time and effort in to provide education services, training, like, to present like our pre-printing platforms and this as something that could be done as a valuable um, outlet for research. I mean, I wonder what um, others think about that, but it surprises me that people complain there's no journals. I can't find journals. I have to wait for years for my papers to come back from peer review sometimes in, education business studies, political science, these kinds of fields that we work with. Well, there's a solution to that. You could be sharing your results openly with the community, but people are very averse to it. So that's a goal for us, I think.
I remember like several years back when I first learned about the concept of preprint, and I must say, as a scientist, I actually didn't quite get it. And then somebody explained it to me, and why is it good for me as a scientist to put it on a preprint? Obviously, it's good for other scientists to be able to read it as soon as possible, because that's, if we go back to the trust and speed, the speed is definitely there. Nobody, maybe nobody sort of reviewed it and verified it, but the speed element, I think, is very crucial, and I think that we saw that in the pandemic, how important that is. But from the author point of view, there's one key important fact that when you're putting something on a preprint, then you have a proof that you were there at that specific time, and that was the thing for me, at least, that really convinced me that why preprint is really important. Because then there's no dispute, right? Because there's a proof that you worked on this, and even if publication takes 8 months, 9 months, a year to get published in let's call it a reputable journal, you still have the proof that you did the work at that specific time, and then the fact that people can steal your work, um, that goes away because you have a proof that you already put it out there.
You could talk about your work at a conference. Somebody could watch you giving your talk, and then they could go off and do it. So I always say you're better off pre-printing, because at least then you've got your DOI number associated with the project. You can't be scooped. But some journals aren't keen on pre-printing papers, and that could be another area for us to address with convincing journals that it doesn't matter that the research has already appeared on a preprint server. It's already out there, because they worry that their impact is going to be reduced. Sorry to jump back in there.
No, absolutely. And this only shows sort of how challenging it can be. I mean, we're just talking about preprints here, and the level of change that is needed, from everybody feeling comfortable to having the right platforms, the right technical solutions to enable this for everybody, and then sort of creating the right incentives to create a positive feedback loop here, so that the behavior keeps coming and coming, just with preprints. So imagine the same with data, the same with code, the same with protocols. I mean, it's that sort of change, and I hate to put it from on the researchers, because I don't think it is. I think a lot of this comes down to the role that we as publishers, for example, can do in facilitating, integrating all these things as part of the article experience, right? So that researchers don't have to think about, what are the benefits of preprint, or why should I have a DOI to my code cited from my paper, or, where do I put the data? That this can be something, that publishers and funders, you know, help and provide already as a almost ready to made solution, so that, that education comes more organically. I'm conscious of time. We only have a few more minutes, and I'd like to hear again from all of you, just a very brief, if we can, sort of statement as to, where would you like, if we look back 10 years from now to this conversation, what would you like to see has happened? At least one thing, one achievable thing that you would really feel happy that has been accomplished. Colleen, do you want to get started?
Okay, well, for me, that's an easy one. I would, because I want that gateway fully open. And I wouldn't say 10 years, I would say a shorter window in time, but opening that gateway by flipping journal portfolios to open access, because I believe that that step will, will really have a snowball effect, if I can use another analogy. Um, that flip in itself is what will prompt um, the 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 reorganization, the very, very practical reorganization in institutions, and on the side of publishers and subsequently service providers, um, to reorganize themselves around openness. That is a process that we will have to go through, and I think the sooner that process happens, then we can dig into all the little bits of asteroid that are floating about the universe, and yeah, making good use of them, and sharing, and everything else.
In in my mind, I don't think that 10 years from now we'll have science and open science. I think that science will be open science, and it's going to be very clear that that's the standard way of doing things. And I once said in a conference that it's not really science if it's not reproducible, because if it's not reproducible, then what is it exactly? It's just, you just flipped a coin, and you came with a result, but if you're not able to create it, that's not really science. So I think that the way that the scientific community is conducting research, communicating research, sharing the findings, sharing the actual work itself, the code, the data, um, computing environments, all of that. I think that's going to be really truly essential, and truly the standard. And it takes a village to do that. And I think that we're together with nature. We are doing the steps to get there, and maybe it's a good opportunity to share with the audience that um, we're working on an open science library together with nature that will have that. So very soon to come, and we will make sort of a proper announcement. But this is coming, and the future is already here. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, Springer Nature is very well positioned for sure to be at the forefront of this open access movement. As you know, and as Colleen said, it's going to be a lot less than 2 years. I don't think researchers need to do much. I think that institutions need to change the way they incentivize researchers in terms of what makes a good publication. And from the publisher's perspective, we need to remove cost to open access publishing. And I know that's not going to be a popular thing for publishers to have to do, but if we really are going to be open in our science, then why should it cost anything for researchers to put their work out in an open way?
Well, thank you so much for those remarks. We are at time, so I'd like to just thank you all again for a great discussion, for sharing your thoughts, and for making the path a little bit brighter. And hopefully we'll get there very soon. Not 10 years, as Colleen said, but just a few years down the line. So thank you all very much, and I hope you enjoyed the session.
Thank you, Erica.